Hi everyone. We are going to talk about sentence boundary errors. This is the most serious type of grammar error that you can have in your writing, and it often causes difficulty for the reader because they can't understand some of what you've written if you have a lot of this type of error. Sentences come with a subject and a verb in English, and most of the time there's also an object. The subject is typically some sort of noun, a person, place, or thing that is going to do the action. That's the doer in the sentence. And the verb is the action that is performed, and then the recipient of that action is the object. Max chewed the bone. Will ate lots of pizza. Sentence fragments are a common type of boundary error, and they can occur when we add a word that is supposed to be used for connecting two complete ideas together, but we tack it on at the beginning of a complete idea and then we don't finish the thought. So if I say Max chewed the bone, it's a complete thought. If I say when Max chewed the bone, there should be more information there, but there's not. The other common type of fragment comes from a phrase that includes a verb, so it kind of masquerades as a sentence, but it isn't really because the verb there isn't necessarily performing an action. And often these are ing verbs. So in the next example, the ball rolling down the hill, which ball? The ball rolling down the hill. It is a phrase that is explaining which ball. It's not an actual sentence. It was going too fast to catch is an actual sentence. Notice there's an ing verb there as well, but it has another verb in front of it, was. Another common type of error comes from a phrase that is additional information. And sometimes instead of connecting it to the sentence, we set it aside as its own sentence when it really shouldn't be. Max chewed the bone. Complete idea. Specifically designed for Labrador retrievers. Who is, what is? We don't really have a full idea here, a full sentence, because that phrase is really referencing the bone. So we need to make that clear to the reader. Max chewed the bone, comma, specifically designed for Labrador retrievers. In this case, we're including the extra information in the sentence, but setting it off with a comma. In the second example, we're adding a pronoun and a verb, it was, so that we can punctuate it as its own sentence and make it into a complete thought of its own. If you're not sure if you're looking at a sentence, run through some questions. Is there a doer? Is there an action? When you read the sentence by itself, does it beg for more information? Does it feel complete? Another way to approach it is to read the sentence, which one? And then fill in your sentence. And if your sentence very clearly answers that question, it's probably one of those phrases with an ing verb in it that is trying to look like a sentence, but it isn't really one. The other place that we get into trouble with sentence boundaries, besides fragments, is when we try to connect sentences together. And why would we bother connecting sentences if it's something that causes trouble? Here's why. Max is a good puppy. He is a Labrador. He likes to chew toys. He likes to run. This paragraph sounds like it was written by a child. And that's because there's no connection between the ideas. When we write, when we think, as adults, we use complex sentences where we have connected complete ideas together to create a single sentence, and we want to clarify the relationship between those ideas within our sentence. And you can't do that if you have just a series of short sentences. Instead, we want to connect our ideas, and the simplest way to do that is to put a semicolon between the two ideas and combine them into a single punctuated sentence. There are 4 other acceptable ways to do it, and we'll talk about each one. But before we get to that, I want to talk about the 2 wrong ways to connect a sentence together. So if I have sentence A, it's a complete thought, sentence B, a complete thought. If the only thing I put between them is a comma, then what I've created is a comma splice. And a comma splice is a type of grammar error. It is probably the most common type of grammar error, and you will often find them even in published professional materials. They slip past people very easily. The second one is a little bit more serious error, and that is the run-on sentence. It is also called a fused sentence, not a sentence fragment, as the slide says. And that is where you literally ram sentence A into sentence B. And so we say, Max is a good puppy, he is a Labrador. What? There's no pause there. You'll notice that there are commas in 3 of the 4 correct connections. That's why the comma splices are such a common problem. And the run-on or the fused sentence is less of one. So let's talk about the right ways to do this. Fanboys connectors, there are 7 of them in the English language, and I'm going to give you an option here for connecting these that doesn't require you to memorize a bunch of different types of words. Sentence connectors in the English language can subordinate, they can coordinate, they can be adjectives, they can be conjunctions. There are a lot of different ones, but they fall into one of 3 categories. This is the first: for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. Fanboys is the acronym for the first letter of each of these words. When you use a fanboys connector, you're going to give a sentence, a comma, the connecting word, and then the second sentence. Max chews toys, comma, but he does not chew shoes. If I use a different connector, I get a different meaning to my sentence, a different connection between the ideas. Max chews toys, comma, and he chews shoes. That's a very different dog than the one in the first sentence. Notice the last sentence here. Max chews toys and shoes. Why isn't there a comma in this one? It's because I don't actually have 2 complete thoughts. Max chews toys could be a standalone thought, but shoes is just another object in the list. And so in this case, and is just connecting items in the list, toys and shoes. Because there are only those 2 items, I'm not going to use commas for my list, and I'm not going to use a comma because I'm not connecting 2 complete ideas. So this is one of the reasons that commas become so frustrating for students, because commas, when you place them with words like but, or, and, are most common fanboys connectors. There are times you need commas because they're functioning as a fanboys connector, and there are times that you don't. And it's a very subtle difference sometimes. The next type of connector I refer to as a non-reversible connector. And this group and the next group are fairly large groups, 40, 50 words or short phrases that could function in this way for each of these. And that's a lot of words to memorize the category of. So rather than do that, I'm going to give you this way to test it. And the way that you test it is you take the connecting word in the middle of the sentence and the sentence that follows, or the complete idea that follows, and you move those to the beginning of the word. So I've taken the however, he does not chew shoes, and I put it out front. And then I read it out loud. However, he does not chew shoes. Max chews toys. That doesn't really make a lot of sense. Right? So in this case, what I have is a non-reversible connector. So the pattern that I'm going to use is the semicolon and comma pattern. If you have a connecting word that is only 1 syllable, it's very rare, there are a couple. In that instance, you wouldn't use the comma after the connecting word. You would only use the semicolon and the connecting word. But that's pretty rare. The last 2 patterns go together, and that's because they both use reversible connectors. Max chews toys when he does not chew shoes. This one is a little bit tricky. When you see what looks like a complete thought, a connecting word, and another complete thought, you think, oh, there's no punctuation there. This must be a run-on. And it's not a run-on. It's actually a correct sentence, because this type of connector, when it's used in the middle of the sentence, gets no punctuation at all. This is the big difference between the reversible connector and the non-reversible connector that needs that semicolon. So whether or not you need the semicolon is determined by this reversibility test. So again, I take the connecting word, the second half of the sentence, I move them around to the front, and then I add a comma at the end of that second idea that is now sitting as the first idea position. So I say, when he does not choose shoes, comma, Max choose toys. That actually makes sense. It's a reversible connection. So I can take my connector and my second thought and I can put them at the beginning of the sentence and it still makes sense. If I can make that swap in word order, I don't have to. Both of these are correct as they're written, and depending on your paragraph, one form or the other may flow better and may be more natural to your voice as a writer. But the fact that it works both ways is what lets me know what type of connecting word I'm dealing with, so I don't have to memorize those big long lists of connecting words. If you struggle with sentence boundaries, you can reach out to me. We can jump in a Zoom session and work on it together. You also have access to tutors from Georgia Highlands and also tutors from BrainFuse and also the Writing Center that is new to Georgia Highlands, just created within this past year. Any of the folks in any of those areas are able to help with this. This is definitely something that if you're struggling with this in your writing, you're going to want to take time to fix in this class before you move on to writing longer papers, more complex projects in other classes. So again, if you have questions, let me know. I'm happy to help you with these.